You can be opening your Bibles to Ecclesiastes chapter 11. And we're going to be looking at 11:9 through 12:8 in just a few moments. I just want to thank all of you for this good time that we were able to spend together. One of the things that is a very precious thing in my life is being able to meet more of my family in other parts of the country. After I became a Christian, I remember the first time I was baptized on a Thursday. I had never gone to church, and I went on that Sunday night because I had to work Sunday morning. And in my mind, you never hung out with people from church. To me, that was just like a weird thing that anybody would ever do. And when I went to the first service there, I was on my way, and I'm like, I don't think I'm probably going to come here on a regular basis. They probably want to be happy for me that I was baptized and everything, so I'll just let them do that. And I went to the building, and there was a family in particular that shook my hand. And they said, we're really happy for you. Would you like to come over for lunch sometime? And this is what I looked like on my face. I went, yeah, that sounds great. But in my heart, I was thinking, why would I do that with you guys? Like, you guys are a bunch of weirdos. I didn't understand that when I became a Christian, that God was putting me into this worldwide family where I can go anywhere and I'll have somebody to stay with. I can have any burden and somebody's going to help lift it for me. I can be in so many different kinds of needs. And God has just blessed us with such a good family, so many people. Right now, you're surrounded in a room of people that love you and care for you and would do anything for you. And I know that sometimes in churches there can be tense moments between individuals and things like that, but when we take a step back and we just realize what the Lord has done for us, I just so thankful for this group here. Wes and Laura Oliver, I know you guys miss them dearly. They're with us in Bowling Green. And they spoke so highly of all of you, and it's been enjoyable for us to be here, for me to be here with you guys for these last couple days. I will say that I have to preach in Bowling Green tonight, so I can't stay super long afterwards. But it's been very much of an encouragement to me to be with all of you. And speaking of the family of Christ that God has blessed us with, can you think back to different conversations you've had with brothers or sisters in Christ that as soon as that conversation was over, or even during the conversation, there were certain things in your mind that started to shift? You started to see things in a way that you had never thought about before, and it was going to forever change the way that you thought about serving God, or that thing that the Bible taught, or something like that. When I was in Minnesota and I was finishing up my degree in a town called Winona, it was an hour away from Rochester, where the Mayo Clinic is. And there was a little church there of 8 people. And I would drive an hour every Sunday, and I would preach for them while I was finishing up my degree. But there was another church down the road. It was a church that was institutional. We had some differences. And I would get together with some of their prominent members and try to see if we could reconcile our differences, if they would try to do things differently with their collection and their treasury. And we tried to talk about all these differences, and ultimately it wasn't going to work. But there was one of those guys that had a conversation with me that affected the way that I looked at serving God. And he asked me the question, he said, "Eric, have you ever wondered why there are so many old, cranky people?" His words, not mine. And he was an older man himself. And I said, no, I really want to know why there are so many old, cranky people, because I've wondered for a while why old people oftentimes just get bitter and angry at everything, and they're not joyful about anything. Please inform me why that happens. And his answer to that question was this passage. And I want to look at Ecclesiastes chapter 11, verse 9 through chapter 12, verse 8, and share with you some of the things that I learned from him in that conversation. Let's start reading in chapter 11, verse 9. "Rejoice, O young man, in your youth. Let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and the sight of your eyes, but know that for all these things God will bring you into judgment. Remove vexation from your heart and put away pain from your body, for youth and the dawn of life are vanity. Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near, of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened, and the clouds return after the rain, in the day when the keepers of the house tremble, and the strong men are bent, and the grinders cease because they are few, and those who look through the windows are dimmed, and the doors on the street are shut, when the sound of the grinding is low, and one rises up at the sound of a bird, and all the daughters of song are brought low. They are afraid also of what is high, and terrors are in the way. The almond tree blossoms, the grasshopper drags itself along, and desire fails because man is going to his eternal home, and the mourners go about the streets. Before the silver cord is snapped, and the golden bowl is broken, and the pitcher is shattered at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the cistern, and the dust returns to the earth as it was given, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. And then verse 8 comes back around to the guy that introduces Solomon and concludes Solomon. Look at what verse 8 says. Vanity of vanity, says the preacher, all is vanity. You notice 4 times in this text that Solomon brings up youth, young people, something like that. This text is one of the texts of the Bible where God is specifically addressing young people. Have you ever thought about the question before, what does God say to young people in the Bible? This is one of those passages that does that. And you might count yourself as somebody who's not a youth, but tomorrow you're going to be older than you are right now. And so you're always getting older. So right now is the youngest you'll ever be again. So in that sense, this passage applies to all of us. But what I want us to do as we look at this passage is see 2 things. There's a problem that all of us face, and then there's a solution to help us prepare for that problem. So there's the problem, and then there's the solution. What is the problem that we all face in this text? If you look at chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, it talks about how there's going to be days in your future that are dark and gloomy. There's going to be days where you say to yourself, I have no pleasure in these days anymore. In other words, you've become an old cranky person. Why is that the case in this passage? What is it that's causing you? And it's guaranteed in your future, if you live long enough to experience this, that there are going to be days where you sit down in your recliner and you go, life is just not what it used to be. Well, this text is talking about the deteriorating body. In chapter 12, verses 3 through 7, that as your body deteriorates, there are certain things that you used to really enjoy doing that are going to be stripped away from you. And there's debates about what he means by every specific part in this passage, and I think you can read it and generally get a good idea of what he means by this. He talks about the keepers of the house, that the keepers of the house are going to fail. If you skip down to verse 5, it talks about people being afraid of heights. Like if I fall, my arms aren't going to be able to hold myself up anymore. When you're young, you've got stronger arms that can do things that older, weaker arms can't do. Think about some of the sports that I did when I was growing up. When I was in junior high and high school, I played football and I was a receiver. And there's a lot of good reasons why I wasn't any good at that. But one of the things that you have to do is you have to try to catch the ball with your arms. And if you don't have arms, then you can't do that. And if you're really into sports, you're really into football or baseball, there's coming a time in your life where you just won't be able to do that anymore. I used to do fencing, like the sword thing. That's how much of a gentleman I was, And so you need your arm to be able to stab people in the chest. And there's going to come a time where I won't be able to do that. In fact, I haven't really done that anymore anyways. Is there some kind of instrument that you really like to play? You have these dreams and visions of being like some great guitar player where you're going to have some awesome band. What are the things that you do with your arms, bodybuilding, that right now means so much to you, and you're not living with the perspective that as I get older, that activity is going to be taken away from me? Notice the next one is the strong men, or the grasshopper drags along. You get this idea of a grasshopper can jump up really high. So it's got really strong legs. And now it's just kind of trying to hobble along. When I first started watching NFL, the first football game I ever watched was Eagles-Giants back in October 28th, 2002, I think it was. And I told myself, whoever wins this game will be my favorite team, and the Eagles won 17-14. And I remember it was around that time that the New York Giants had a running back named Tiki Barber, and I just hated the guy because every time he played against the Eagles, he would just shred them up. And he retired in 2006, but after a few years of retirement in 2011, he tried to get back into the game at the ripe old age of 36. And he didn't make the cut anymore. And he said in an interview, I need to prove to myself that I can be successful at something. You already were, by the way. I know I'm going to be successful as a football player. I don't know why. The odds say no. I'm 36 and I haven't played in 4 years, but I just know. What activities do you like to hike? You like to travel the world? And do you like to do all these kinds of things that your legs are necessary? There's coming a time where you will not be able to do those things anymore. What about, isn't this a really uplifting sermon so far? The grinders and the sound of grinding. I think this is talking about your teeth. I know, technology has allowed us to have like implants and all that, but even, I know a guy in California that even the implanted teeth that he has are starting to fall out, and those are creating problems as well. Whenever I lived in California, there was a family that had placed membership at the church with us, and the husband wanted to get together. And I was like, cool, that sounds great. So I recommended a coffee shop, and we went to a coffee shop. And he's like, what do you recommend that I get here? And I was like, the acai bowls are killer. If you've never had an acai bowl, it's like a Brazilian blueberry kind of thing, but with more antioxidants, and it tastes really good and all this kind of stuff. And so, like I said, get the acai bowl, and it's got peanut butter on it, which sounds like it's a bad combination, but it's a really great combination. And then they put these like granola on it, and he's like, okay, that sounds good, but I can't have that. And I said, why? And he opened up his mouth. He's like, I got no teeth. Like, how did I not notice that just from the way you talked? And so he's like, I got to get a smoothie. I have to gum everything. Can you imagine how frustrating that would be? Like, I love it when I get to travel and I go on Yelp and I find what all the highest reviewed restaurants are. And it's always fun reading like the really negative views, which is just the modern version of numbers when they're complaining about the food and complaining about this and that. But if you're like the kind of person that likes to go different places and not just go to the chain restaurants, but you like to find the local things that are really good, there's likely coming a time in your future where you won't be able to do that anymore. All right? So you can start to see why you might be grumpy. Notice also those who look through the windows, I think that's referring to your eyes. What are the things that you like to do with your eyes? You like to read books? You like to watch movies? You like to see friends and talk with them. Age is going to start to strip that away from you as well, where you're not going to be able to read the books or watch the movies anymore, at least as effectively as you used to be able to. My paternal grandfather, one of the most studious readers I've ever known, he died last year, the day before he was going to turn 100. And in the last, I guess, 6 years of his life, he had really bad glaucoma. And he always loved reading. And what he had to resort to towards the end of his life was just listening to audiobooks that his daughter would put the CD in and have to change it out or like get the TV on. And all he could do was just listen to things. What about the doors, your lips, your vocal cords? Have you ever seen older people that used to love song leading? And as they get older, they try to get up to the pulpit, and they're a little bit slower because the grasshopper drags itself along, and they just miss being able to lead hymns like they used to be able to. And by the way, if you're a younger guy and you're trying to figure out what my gifts and my abilities are to serve the Lord, if you never step out and you never try anything, I know that you're going to have the discomfort and the clunkiness of learning how to do it, but if you never step out and do those kinds of things, you realize that there's going to come a time where you might look back in your past and go, why didn't I ever at least try to step out and do something? You like to sing along with songs, you like to have conversations. Whenever I lived in Atlanta, I'd get together with Sewell Hall every week, and he would talk about his voice not being as strong as it used to be able to be, and how frustrating that could be, especially for preaching. What about this light sleep that verse 4 talks about, like your ears? Look at verse 4 again and what this says. One rises up at the sound of a bird, and all the daughters of song are brought low. How frustrating is this? It's like when you're awake, you can't hear anything, and when you're asleep, a dumb little bird can wake you up. Is that true when you get older, that you wake up easier, but then when you're awake, it's like, how come I can't hear the bird now? I know I heard the bird. Solomon, one of the things that he enjoyed, I got singers, both men and women, like we looked at in chapter 2, verse 8, when he had his whimsical things. You remember that? Another one of those conversations that I had with Sewell, when he was 91 years old, I think he just turned 93. When he was 91, and I would during COVID, so we were live streaming our sermons on Wednesday nights instead of Bible class, so they wanted me to live stream a series of lessons on Psalm 23, and after I'd go preach one of those sermons, during the thick of COVID, I just texted Sewell and I said, is it okay if I just stop by and talk with you after I'm done preaching these sermons to an empty auditorium and just tell me what I need to know as a young preacher? He's like, yeah, I'd love that. And so we would just talk and talk and talk, and he told me one time that with his inability to hear like he used to be able to, that life is just cruel. Can't even have a conversation without for sure knowing that you heard what you thought you heard. You're trying to read lips, but that gets difficult as well. What about in verse 5, the almond tree blossoms? That's talking about gray hair, I think. And hair oftentimes is pictured as a way of beauty. Young men, one of the things that means a lot to them sometimes is my strength, and look at how healthy my body is. And for young women, look at how beautiful I am. And you know, the most beautiful that you and your husband will ever look together, you and your wife will ever look together, are your wedding photos. That's the best you two are ever going to look together. And then, do you know what starts to happen as the years go? So, by the way, if you build your relationship based off of looks, you're building it entirely off of the one thing that's going to be stripped away in time. Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Let's say that there's a woman and she makes all of her meaning in life how good I look. And so I'm going to do my nails all the time, and we're going to spend like $300 a month on my hair and my nails. And if you got the money to do that, I guess, whatever, go ahead and do that, I guess. But you realize that age is going to strip that stuff away from you. What about in verse 5 where he talks about desire failing? And this is talking about sexual desire. How many young people wreck their life because they're not willing to control desires that even in their lifetime will die out? Guys who are addicted to porn, guys who are not going to control themselves sexually before they're married and after they're married. If you've been addicted to porn, marriage is not going to solve that either. But you make these choices and you develop these habits for these things that you just feel like are so strong that you can't control, and God is going to help you control these kinds of things. But if you don't control this, you're going to end up sacrificing so much of your youth and your relational health with the spouse for out of a pursuit that in this life it will die. Notice the one in verse 6, that the silver cord is snapped and the golden bowl is broken. How many of you like learning things? I think this is talking about your brain and spinal cord or something like the end of everything. Like maybe the last thing you have, I can't hear as well anymore, I can't see as well anymore, but I still have accumulated a lot of the things that I've learned in life, and even though I've forgotten some of it, there's still a lot of things that are lodged in there that I can still converse about and things like this. You like listening to podcasts, you like listening to books and reading books and learning new things. I love doing that sort of thing. My maternal grandfather, he died a couple years ago. And he was an important psychologist kind of guy. Ronald Reagan picked him to lead one of the bureaucracies of the government in the 80s. And so he did all these important things and stuff. And when I was in high school, I would get breakfast with him twice a month. And he was the kind of guy that even though he didn't believe in the Bible, I could ask him questions about so many things in the world, and he would just seem to have a lot to say about a lot of things. He was a lifelong learner. Whenever I was able to visit Minnesota after I moved away, and I would visit from time to time, I would see him, and he started developing cancer. And the last time I saw him, he was just stretched out on a couch, And I said, "Hey, Grandpa, how are you doing?" And he went, is that Scott or is that Eric? I'm like, okay, it's Eric. Yeah, how are you doing? And memories would go through my mind about the times that he would skateboard with me. And he would throw a Nerf football with me. I remember those days where he was able to do a lot of things that he just, but the thing that remained with him for the longest was his intellect. And that silver cord was being snapped and that golden bowl was shattering. Do you see that in verse 8 of chapter 12 when Solomon says that this is vanity of vanities, or the guy that's concluding Solomon's quotes here is saying vanity of vanities. I've got 4 kids. My oldest is 8. My youngest turns 2 today. It's his birthday today. It's okay. He doesn't know what's going on. But everybody tells me that has had kids and the kids are older and everything and they have grandkids now, like, you enjoy it while you can. It goes by so quickly. And I'm like, man, like the sleeping is not, like, I sometimes want it to go quickly. But people don't mean it that way. They say you enjoy every precious moment. Because these days are quicker than you think. And I remember when I was younger than I am now, thinking that old people, like, why do you keep saying that kind of thing to me? And I know I'm only 34, I'm not old, but I'm getting a little bit of a small taste of it. My 8-year-old is now 8. Like, that's crazy. When vanity of vanity, these things go by quickly. You might be young right now. You might think, well, yeah, my meaning in life can be the things that I do with my arms or my legs or my teeth or my eyes, or I can't control my sexual passions. You just give it some time and age will strip all of these things away from you. And so he says, vanity of vanities. By the way, the Hebrew word for vanity is hebel, which means that it's fleeting. This idea of trying to grasp the wind like we talked about on Friday or Saturday. Are there any people in the Bible that have a name that sound like Hebel? Habel is Abel. And it's basically the same word in Hebrew. When you think about Abel in the Bible, what do you think of? You think of somebody who was here and then he was gone. And what Ecclesiastes is saying, what Solomon is saying, is that this life, the way that the earth is right now, the life under the sun, that we're subjected to living a life like Abel. You're here, you're gone. Just snap of a finger. And all these things that you might want to build your life around, all these things that mean everything to you, are going to be taken away. Do you see that that's a problem? Well, what's the solution to prepare for all of this in this text? This is where we look at the beginning of the passage. Look at, if you have the ESV, it does this. Now, I'm not the kind of preacher that needs everything to start with the same letter. But if you look at chapter 11, verse 9, what's the first word? Rejoice. If you look at chapter 11, verse 10, it's remove. And look at chapter 12, verse 1, remember. There are 3 things that are all just in the text that happen to begin with the letter R, and these 3 things preface the deterioration of the body. And these things help us understand how to prepare for the inevitable. In chapter 11, verse 9, he says to rejoice in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart. Now, parents, how many of you want to tell your kids, hey, I want you to walk in the ways of your heart? No! Doesn't the Bible teach that, like, in Jeremiah 17:9, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick? Who can understand it? Don't follow your heart. But then this passage says, walk in the ways of your heart. So, should we trust the Bible or not? Is it okay for kids to follow their heart? Yeah, with a qualifier. Do you see that in this passage in chapter 11, verse 9? Know that for all these things, God will bring you into judgment. Do what you want to do within the restrictions of what God has said. Don't ever justify sin. So if you're a younger person, if whatever your body can do right now, if it can go hiking, if you want to do a road trip with some friends, if you want to enjoy some good music, enjoy those things, but know that you won't always be able to enjoy them, and don't commit sin. If your desires are not sinful, it's okay to enjoy the things of this life. It's fine. God is giving us permission to do that. So here's a passage in the Bible that says, young people, walk in the ways of your heart, but don't sin. Well, you're young, enjoy what you can. But in chapter 11, verse 10, remove vexation from your heart. Vexation meaning sorrow, spite, grief, puzzlement. It's something that doesn't make sense. And so you've seen an old cranky person. Have you ever seen a young cranky person? They exist too. Did you know that? He's telling the young people that while you're trying to enjoy all the things in this life, as long as you're not sinning, remove vexation from your heart. There are things that are frustrating. There are things that are puzzles in life, and you need to remove them. Okay, this reminds me of a time when Samantha and I were dating. You know, I had been a Christian for a year and a half, and then I met her, and I taught her the gospel, so I clearly was like much more mature than she was in the Lord. And so there was one time where she wanted to talk to me about something she struggled with, and my brilliant advice was this. I said, okay, well, it's really quite simple, honey. You just have to stop it. And that was a big learning moment for me because I realized that my beautiful piece of advice was not helpful. When this passage says, remove vexation, okay, how? How? In Minnesota, we called them slivers, where you get like a little piece of wood in your finger or your hand or something. You guys call them splinters, right? Okay, so if somebody says, hey, you need to remove that splinter. Oh, do I have one? Where is it? If you're going to remove vexation from your heart, you have to first know that it's there. And then from there, you learn to think differently about the thing that you're vexed about. All right, what are some things that young people, or anybody, even in a church setting, could get frustrated about? FOMO. Fear of missing out. You ever had that happen before where you're on social media? If you're an older person, it's Facebook. If you're a younger person, it's not Facebook anymore. And you see that somebody on social media posted like girls' night out, and it's like 4 girls from church that went out to eat, and you're like, oh, I'm never invited. Or you see some people from church hanging out and doing this, that, or the other thing, and they post something. You're like, how come every time I've never included in why? Okay, could that be frustrating and vexing? Yeah. And then the text says, remove the vexation. Well, how? All right. Maybe I learned to think about some of this stuff differently. Maybe I learned to think that, you know what, I've invited people to certain things, and there's people that I've just forgotten, and I meant nothing by it. Or we couldn't include everybody, and you know, maybe they intend to bring me the next time or something. Can we learn to think in a different way so we're not muddling it about in this depressed way all the time? What about rules from old people? If you're a younger person, mom and dad won't let me have my cell phone when I go to bed, and you're like, okay, like you're complaining about old cranky people, but look at you. How's life going for you? How about you learn to think about things differently because you can't control your circumstances right now? Remove vexation. Notice the last one is to remember your Creator in the days of your youth. Keep God at the center of your youthful joy. Because when this text says that you enjoy the things that you can enjoy, but God is always the center. God is always the biggest passion. That means that as I get older, yeah, I loved throwing the football around. I loved shooting guns. I loved stabbing people with the sword and all this sort of thing. But because God was always my God, it's a bummer I can't do that kind of stuff anymore, but nothing can strip me away from God. Do you see why you start to get old cranky people? It's because maybe when they're younger, they go to church, they kind of read their Bible every now and then, but really their biggest passion are all these other things. And the things that actually meant the most to them are being stripped away, and it leaves them old and bitter. But what if you have somebody who always served God? God was the center of everything. Yeah, I used to be able to do that, but can't anymore, and I just have to accept it. That's the way it is. Nothing's going to change that. What do you do as a young person then? In the last few years, I've had a couple different opportunities, Bible studies with people, with older guys who had fallen away. And they had come back to the Lord. And there's one guy that lived in Alabama when I lived in Atlanta. And he had a friend that he used to work with, and he wanted somebody to, all three of us, meet in Atlanta somewhere and have a Bible study with this person. So we would study. And after the person left that we were studying with, the guy that arranged the study would say, I fell away for 30 years. The only thing I cared about was money. And now when we're looking at the Gospel of Mark right now, like he's just like going like this the whole time. Like I can't even read it. There's coming a time where allegedly, if this is precious to you, your eyes may not be able to lay hold on it anymore. When I was in California, there's a woman at the church who had passed on. And when we went to the funeral place, there were quilts that were draped over all of the chairs. And when I walked in, I asked one of the family members what all these quilts were. And they said, well, these are the quilts that Nanny made for everybody. You remember when Dorcas dies in Acts chapter 9, and everybody's at the funeral bringing all these things that she's made? Are you learning skills that can be used to bless other people? And if you think from the perspective of when I die, will anybody have anything tangible to bring or to say about the way that God was the center of everything that I did, not for human praise, but to make the point that I was making an impact in the lives of other people? Have you found what your gifts are? Have you figured out how to make meals so that these hands and these arms that can't always do these things can do it well you can? I've seen some people age in a bitter way. And I've seen a lot of saints age gracefully, where they just acknowledge and accept, I can't do everything I used to be able to do, but God has always been my rock. And because God has always been my rock, the worst that age can do to me is make me a little sad, but it won't crush me. What will happen if we prepare in these kinds of ways? 1 Corinthians 15, verses 42 to 44 says this about our bodies. So it is with the resurrection of the dead. What is sown is perishable. What is raised is imperishable. It is sown in dishonor. It is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness. It is raised in power. It is sown a natural body. It is raised a spiritual body. If there is a natural body, there is also a spiritual body. You know what makes it possible that one day this body will be raised again? It's because of what Jesus did for us on the cross. And Jesus breaking open the dreariness of death by conquering it. It is what allows these bodies to be fully restored, where they can't erode or deteriorate anymore. And as we're busy about trying to find meaning in this life, where we forsake the resurrection body in which we'll dwell with God forever, and we'll have no more pain or crying or tears. We're about to go to the table, to the Lord's Supper. I thank you so much for your attention and for your kindness and for this time that we could spend together. But as we go to the table and we think about what it is that the Lord has done, think about your decaying body and how Jesus came in a body and He died and He conquered death, and we're remembering what it is that He's done for us. Thank you so much, and we'll partake in the Lord's Supper at this time.